Thank you very much, Roni. Our focus in this webinar is going to be on business model innovation for established companies, which is a very interesting and challenging topic. I've been studying and teaching business models for more than 20 years, and being in Silicon Valley, our focus tends to be a focus on startups. And when we think about business model, I like to use the analogy of building a house. When you go and build a house, you would probably want to have a blueprint first that will guide you through the process. And in a very similar way, before you go and build a company, the business model is like a blueprint of the business that helps you build the company in a deliberate way. And let's think about what are the elements of that blueprint. So the first element of the blueprint or the business model is the value creation model that tells us how we're going to create value for our customers and how we're going to deliver it to them. The second key element of the business model is the profit model that tells us how we're going to get compensated for doing all of this work. And the third and most important element of the business model is the logic of the business that tells us why it's going to work. And what we do in our different courses is really learn how to build that house, how to put together that blueprint in a deliberate way. Of course, once we kind of put this house together, the first time it's exposed to rain, it usually collapses. And that's what happens to most startups a lot of the time. And what we do is test and retest, learn from each test, and rebuild our business model again and again and again until we manage to put together what I call a viable business model. In the startup world, we can afford to iterate and fail multiple times because we don't have that much to lose. We don't have that many customers, we don't have that many employees, and if we ultimately fail, what will happen is that we can charge that failure to learning, right? So we've learned something new, we have a good story to tell, so our losses are bounded. On the other hand, when we build a business model in an established company, it's an entirely different story. What happens is that when we need to take our existing business model and build a new one, it's a little bit like building a house when you still live in it. And that has a few problems, if any of you experience that. We have customers, and our existing customers actually love our business model. And they say, why do you need to change it? You don't need to change it. You want everything to keep going the way it has been going. We just like it that way. We have employees who are used to doing business in a certain way, and they very often resist the change. And we sometimes have shareholders who are risk averse, and they don't necessarily want us to invest in a new and untested business model. And they say, you know, give me my quarterly results. So we have all of these challenges. So when I see a company that managed to change its business model multiple times and do it again and again over more than 100 years, I pay attention. And these are companies that have learning and innovation in their DNA, and there's a lot we can learn from them. One of these companies is the Fung Group that started as Li and Fung 109 years ago. I've been working with them over the past 3 to 4 years, and I've been really impressed by the way they're responding to the tremendous change that's taking place in their industry. I think all of us can learn from what they're doing, and we're going to do that today. It's a special pleasure to have Leonard Lane with us. Leonard will help us understand what makes the Fung Group tick. Our format today is going to be a fireside chat format, and we'll open it up to questions a little bit later, but please feel free to ask questions as we go along. So my first question to you, Leonard, is the Fung Group is a group of companies that touches hundreds of millions, maybe billions of consumers over a year, but most of them have never heard about it. So what is it? What is the Fung Group? Can you give us a little bit of a background?
A little bit of a background. Thank you, Chaim, and thank you for that. Let me start just with a brief history of the group, and then we're going to come back to that a little bit later when we talk about how we've changed our business model. So the company will celebrate next year its 110th anniversary. And as you point out, we have lived through a couple of world wars. We have lived through a few financial crises. We have lived through the, as we'll come back much later to talk about, the switch in the world from global production to global consumption. And we've been able to work our way through that in a variety of interesting ways with a number of interesting ideas. So let me start quickly with our history. We started in 1906 in Canton, and we were a Canton-based China trader, started by Victor Fung, who was our group chairman's grandfather. We moved to Hong Kong in 1937. And in 1949 to 79, before China opened up, we were basically a Hong Kong-based exporter. And we were exporting a number of goods that we could make in Hong Kong less expensively than could be made in the West, were needed by the West, and we exported those best to the West and a little bit to Europe. In 1979, a major event happened and China opened up. That opened up a vast production opportunity for us. And so in 1979, we grew into a regional trading company with the ability to source from factories throughout China to meet the specific orders of our customers in the West. Then in 1995, we began a little bit of a switch, and we moved from being a regional company to basically becoming a multinational group of companies. And in 1995, moving into 2004 and then into 2009, we established large bases in Europe, large bases in the United States in order to get closer to our customers so we in fact could meet their needs in terms of the requirements of the retailers in the West and be able to match that with our tremendous sourcing capabilities in the East. So that's kind of a bit of a history. The group itself is kind of interesting. The group is basically overseen by the part that I'm in, which is the Fung Holdings 1937 Limited. It's the private entity that oversees our public group of companies. And in the group of companies, we have three major parts. We have our trading and logistics company, which we call Li & Fung Limited. They're listed on the Stock Exchange of Hong Kong. We have our distribution company, which is called our Global Brands Group, also listed on the Stock Exchange in Hong Kong, but they are based in New York. And that's the group that runs our licensed brands across the world. The third group is a retailing group, also based in Hong Kong, made up of 7 different businesses, which we have everything from toys, sales and distribution, to Circle K stores, to high-end men's clothing, and quite a few distribution channels in China. A little bit more specifically about the group. When I take a look at the trading group, we have 2 different businesses, as you know. We have what we call an agency business, which is a business where primarily a U.S. retailer or a European retailer places an order for either a garment, accessories, shoes, and we go find the best place to source that from to meet their quality and delivery requirements, and we ship that back to them store ready for a particular commission. The second part of our business we call a trading as principal business, where we in fact get further upstream into the design, product development, in fact even making complete collections for our retail customers. And that group of companies primarily operates in our we call hard lines, furniture area, beauty area, fast fashion. And then we have a third group, logistics. That group handles in-country logistics primarily, in fact primarily exclusively in China and Southeast Asia. And then we have a new group that we started in this 3-year plan called our Vendor Support Services, which is working toward helping our own factories build their capacity to compete in this digital economy. But then the group has a couple of other interesting, we call value-add features. If you look over there to the side of the slide, you can see something called the Fung Global Institute, which is now renamed the Asia Global Institute, which is a think tank that primarily focuses on bringing Asian issues to the global policy table. And we're working on a number of things, and that entire research capability is available to the group. We have Fung Capital, which is the Fung family's venture capital firm, and there we primarily are looking in the U.S. at investing in technologies in front of the business. So we're constantly looking at what's happening 5, 7, even 10 years in front of us, and which startups, as a matter of fact, are playing in those areas, and what are the things that we can learn from them. We have a group in London that looks at brands, and our group in China takes a look at opportunities in China. In addition to that, we have my group, which is Fung Academy, which is designed to accelerate learning across the group. We are also the group that houses we call our innovation catalyst and our innovation laboratory and Explorium, which we'll talk about in a little while. 1906 Foundation, which is a Fung family foundation that invests in good works in the area, in the region, and also has our Fung Scholars program where we have in excess of, I believe, 2,000 students on scholarships from Asia going to school around the world. So that's kind of a look at the group. In terms of our size, just some statistics about the trading company alone from our 2014 annual report. We do annual sales of about $19.3 billion, which makes us one of the larger players in our group, as you know. We have 300 offices worldwide, approximately 25,000 employees, around 15,000 suppliers or vendors that are actually working for us every single day. And by the way, as you know, we're an asset-light organization. With minor exceptions, we do not own any of those factories. And so the unique value proposition for us is taking the order for this shirt and being able to take that single order, put it to a group of factories that can meet the quality and timeliness and distribution requirements, and then ship that to the customer. And so we do that for every single order. And that gets to a number of, we have 3.1 billion pieces that are kind of shipped around the world. But they told me here the other day that I said, suppose I count all the buttons and all the zippers. And they tell me that at some point in time during the course of a year, we're running 60 billion pieces of stuff through our system in order to meet the customer requirements around the world. So that's kind of an overview of the group. Three major companies. The largest one is our trading company. It's the one you've been working closely with here in the last 3 to 4 years. And we're going to be celebrating next year 110 years, and we'll get into some of the ways we do it.
That's great. So when I kind of looked in the press last week, actually, I discovered that you had a big event. You opened the Explorium. And if we look at the way the newspapers kind of reported it, if we could go to that slide, they say the Fung Group launches the world's first retail business model testing platform in Shanghai. So it's a testing platform for retail. So what is this Explorium and why are you doing it?
That's a great question. And today, as I'm going to go through a couple of slides, there's an opening slide from last Thursday. I'm going to sit back. We're just really happy to talk about that today. The Explorium itself was created to allow our retailers, retailers that are our customers, retailers that are not our customers, our brands and technology partners, to experiment with different omni-channel business models to prepare for the future of retail. And I'm going to go into that in just a minute. So that at the high level, that's the purpose of the Explorium. What it actually is, it's created on our campus in Shanghai, where we had a significant amount of space that we thought we could use in a way that's different from just office space, given the future of retail. So we created Explorium, which is basically a lab, easiest way to describe it. 120,000 square meter destination for shoppers in Shanghai. And it publicly opened last Thursday on the 24th. The first phase one is for children and much more family-centric. It's a part retail experience, it's a part tech exploration, and it's a part play and entertainment, because as we're taking a look at retail as an experience in the future and new frontiers of retailing, play and gaming becomes very important. So I want to just go through a couple of things that really are driving us around that. We take a look at this basically, and the Explorium, and one of the things we showed, kids love to play. And in China, as you know, they have a one-child family, and so you can have a child with 2 sets of parents, and possibly even 2 sets of grandparents, and the other closely related family members. So the one child coming to play and the one child coming to purchase something that you want to purchase for the child can bring a significant number of people in one family to the retail experience. And so we wanted to test, was that for real? The second thing that we did was we recognized in doing that, the fact that kids love to play, that we're also using digital online technology. And in the new frontiers of retailing, the acceleration or the exponential increase in computing power, as we call it, accelerates the use of technology and the retail experience. I think a lot of people watching today buy on their iPads or their Galaxies. They buy mobilely, they buy on the computer, they buy through bricks and mortar. All of those are going on, and so we wanted to be able to put the use of technology into that lab for experiments. And we also understood there's a tremendous drive toward personalization and customization, so we've been experimenting with 3D printing, and you have an example here of toys that we can experiment with, of which we're putting the play together with the experience together with the child and bringing the family and getting them fully involved in this whole process. But I think most important when we take a look at this is to take a look at the reasons that we're doing this. And you talked about 100 years plus of existence, and so we'll talk about our business strategy in a little while, and the key word for us is context. And in context, we take a look out into the future, and this is what we saw shaping the world today and helping drive our thinking as to why we needed an Explorium. So we'll talk a little bit later about the next billion emerging consumers in markets like China and across Asia. So we took a look at that, as we all know, that's going to be the largest area for growth in the next 20 to 30 years. We look at the accelerating technological progress and disruption, and we took a look at the experience economy, and we said, how do we put all that together? And when we put it together, what do we get? And so we're fairly strong on scenario building, and William has a great example that he uses at the beginning of each 3-year plan. As he said, we paint the scenario, and then he takes a leap on the stage, and he literally jumps into that scenario. And he says, we put ourselves into that scenario and we look backwards and say, what do we have to do now to get from where we are to where we're going to go? And so if you take a look at the slide that's up there, we saw new consumers, exponential technology, the experience economy, and put it all together. And we basically said, it's really important for us to understand how it works. We can't do it theoretically. Let's put it in place. And so in doing that enabled us to think a little bit about what we call the Explorium premise, purpose, philosophy, and product. So it kind of goes back to Marketing 101. We took our 4 Ps and worded them a little bit differently. So in terms of the Explorium, looking at retailers and brands, both the ones that we work with and others that want to come in and experiment with using omni-channel processes or the omni-channel experience with customers in China. We're basically saying, look, the world of retail is changing. We are, and one of the reasons that we pride ourselves in the organization for the 100 years is we have a learning journey to go on to move into this new frontier of retailing. And that learning journey, we want to take the customers that will shop in a retail store and experience a brand, we want to take them through that learning journey. And so the next thing we have is what's our philosophy is we basically want people in this learning journey to be able to be very iterative, to be very strategic, and to look at omni-channel that way. And then we'll have an experiment orchestration platform with all the tools for them to go ahead and do this. So we put all of that together, and that really kind of gets to the way that we look at all of this. There's 3 things that we see we need to learn. We take our 110 years of history and the context we're looking at, which we'll talk about billion to billion a little bit later, and we say, how does all that work in what will be our largest market? And that is, what do we need to learn to win in this world? And learning becomes key for us. So we have to develop valid business models that deliver, as you point away, the customer value across the channel. So that's the omni-channel strategy we can help our customers and brands and retailers think about developing using an experiment. And to go to your point a little bit earlier, you don't have to bet the whole store on that one, and as Victor says, you don't have to lose your shirt. You basically can have a small experiment, set up a hypothesis, take the learning from it, and say, did we want to go forward with this idea so we'll persevere with it? Or do we say, that didn't work so I'm going to pivot, but I took some learning away and go to the next one? That means in order to do that from our perspective in the business, and that's what the Academy really is in the Fung Group to do, is we have to build a creative capability. And the creative capability is not just installing or just basically innovating. For us, it's really how do we invent things. And invention, I think, as you'll talk about, that creates the new value in the marketplace. And then finally, we need to make it work. And the Explorium is a way for us as an entire group to test how well we're doing. In a sense, we call it kind of Fung Works. It's our lab. So we want to move basically exploration from being a chore to the step of both being a skill and finally becoming a habit. And the Explorium is all of that wrapped into one. Retailers, brands, come experiment with the space in China with Chinese consumers. Test your hypotheses. We have the technology tools. We have the support system for you to do that. IBM is one of our partners in this one. Pico, which is an event management group that will set up all these things. Then we have our experimentation team. So we say, we want you to come do this. But for the Fung Group itself, it enables us to kind of build this capability of invention and experimentation of culture that becomes a habit.
Very interesting. So when a consumer comes to the Explorium, do they go shopping or do they participate in an experiment?
Great question. This is a laboratory. We want to take them on a journey. So we are having the consumer participating in experiments. And by the way, they can also purchase something if they want to while they're there as they participate in this experiment, and we watch that behavior. And we have various pieces of technology which we can track them as they're going through the Explorium. We can, of course, see how long they linger at a particular spot. We can, see all those things that the technology and the frontiers of retailing enable us to do. And we can watch what engage what their experience is. We also have things there for them to purchase, but that's not the main reason we're there. It's to have them participate in the journey of the new frontier of retailing and exploring the future through their eyes, which is the eyes of the consumer at the moment in China.
That's great. So can you describe for us one of those experiments and what you learned from it?
Yeah. Kids love to play. I won't mention the brand that we're doing this with, but we have the hypothesis that we set up that if this is for a shoe, if the children come in and they try on the shoe and they walk around the store with it, they'll buy it. But if they come in and try on the shoe and go play with it for a while, the odds of them purchasing it are even greater. So I'm simplifying a fairly complex experiment, but we had a board up there that you can sort of see, and we had a pad in back of it, and the kids could come up and they could play on the board, play on the pad, and they could wave their arms in relation to what you saw on the screen. And it turned out that the parents were also doing the same thing with the children, so we had mother and father and the children playing on all of this. They're watching the screen with the character telling you, wave your arms like this, go like that. And sure enough, we found out over time that the purchase habits were, in fact, with that experience, they tended to purchase more shoes. And so this particular brand, we found that out, and they are now installing this entire game in a number of their stores in China. So that's an example of an experiment that ran over a few weeks. We had a good hypothesis. We tested it. We had the technology. We had ethnographers look at it. We sat down with the brand and said, what did we learn? What does the brand have to do to implement it? And the brand's now taking it to their stores. And we'll also help the brand think about or look at how they collect the data from all of that to see how it ties to our experiment.
That's terrific. So we talked about what happened last week. Let's go back 110 years and kind of think about Li & Fung as a startup and how it changed its business model over time.
Okay. So I think I'm going to go back to the very first slide so that we can kind of trace the years through this. So we started, if we go back in 1906, as I want to say a Canton-based Chinese trader, where Victor's grandfather spoke English and his partner was a trader, and the two together would sell to the Western companies that wanted to buy porcelain and fireworks. So we progressed from those two products into additional products from 1906. 1937 we moved to Hong Kong, and then continued to do that through 1949. And of course in 1949 China basically closed itself down. So
during the first period, what was kind of the key source of differentiated value that the company created for its customers?
Yeah, we actually were able to source products at the right price and in the right quantity and get them delivered to the port that they could export from in China. And the family business was very, very focused on what the appropriate products at that time, and we had a really good sourcing network. And that's always been a history of having a good sourcing network and having deep relationships with those factories that we could trust them and they could trust us. So it was really the quality and strength of that factory relationship, and to be able to adapt the Western requirement of a product to the Eastern requirement of production.
And what were some examples of leading products during that period?
Well, we moved porcelain, fireworks, a significant amount of time into toys, mostly in that area. And I'd have to go back and look at the history book, but Victor Fung has written a very good history, and you're going to find a few other products that we had during that point in time.
Great. And Victor Fung, of course, is the chairman of
chairman of the group, right?
Great. So let's go to the 40s and beyond.
Okay, so 1949, China closes down. And now, if you will, the Chinese factories are now unavailable to us. So Li and Fung then turned into more of basically a Hong Kong-based exporter. And of course, what was Hong Kong known for in those days? We were a toy exporter, as well as other hard lines. And apparel that was coming from Hong Kong and primarily being shipped to the United States. So we were basically a Hong Kong company, and that's and a Hong Kong exporter, and that was the story of Hong Kong at that point in time, and that took us up through 1949 to 1979.
Okay. And what happened in the 70s?
In 70s, of course, 79, we had another significant breakthrough. What had been closed to us before opened up. And prior to 1979, I should say, besides being a Hong Kong-based exporter, we also were recognized as being able to go to other countries, Taiwan, Thailand, other parts of Southeast Asia, and find factories that could produce the same quantity or same quality of goods that we were able to produce in Hong Kong. And so up to 79, we also began the process of being able to become a network orchestrator, which we continue to call ourselves, to orchestrate a series of factories around a particular customer requirement. And we were one of the only companies that could do that. If you remember, there were tariffs, and so when you ran out of a tariff in one country, you'd had to go to another. And we actually became very good at doing that while we were based in Hong Kong. So then in 79, China opened up, and that opened back up our opportunity to go back to the part we knew well, which was sourcing in China. And that was also the story of Hong Kong, because Hong Kong in 79, the Hong Kong entrepreneurs went back into China, reestablished the factories, reestablished their relationships, reestablished the sourcing network, which is exactly what we did. And that was able to build the company again from a Hong Kong to a multinational group of companies. And if we take a look at that span, we take it 79 roughly to 2009. We look at that 30-year period, which for us is really summed up in one set of words: the globalization of production. And I think everybody in the audience is well familiar with that. We took advantage of that opportunity. We took advantage of the arbitrage that we could get of being able to aggregate within factories around a particular area to the distributed distribution process. And we're able to take advantage of all of that because of our long sourcing history and knowledge of the China market.
So what would happen is that a retailer wanted to have an order with certain characteristics, and you could create a customized supply chain for that order.
That we could, and let me in fact show you how that works. This is very interesting, so I'm going to move ahead a few slides here. When we take a look at the globalization of production, for us it's really dispersed manufacturing. And so we get an order from a company to make parkas. There's a picture that you can see here. It's borderless manufacturing. Within the trading company, as you saw, there was an agency business and there's trading as principal businesses. So let me go into the agency business at the moment. We have a U.S. retailer that wants 100,000 of those parkas. That retailer gives us the order. We already have a customer team that's focused on that retailer. And even maybe within that team, we have a subset of a team that's focused on just this particular kind of product. And so that team will go, first of all, get the design from the customer, make sure that everyone's clear on the design, then we'll go look for the factories to make it. And as you can take a look at this, there's different pieces that it will finally say, well, made in Hong Kong, the lining will come from Taiwan, other parts will come from China, the zipper will come from Japan, the shell will come from Korea, and all that will come together done by this one team. and that's wrapped around one order, and that will then be taken. We'll order the fabric from the mill will then come to the factory where the cutting and sewing is done. The zippers, the buttons, and so forth are added to it. We'll tag it, make it store ready, and give it to the logistics provider to ship to the United States. And so that is the model that we use. That's how you get the 3.1 billion pieces of stuff that we move through. The system and finished products, and the roughly 60 billion zippers and buttons and everything else that goes with it.
Great. So, and we talked earlier very briefly about the business model being an asset-light business model. What does that mean?
Asset-light is a really great point. With minor exceptions, I talked to you about 4 or 5 different steps in this picture that's up on the screen. We don't own any of the factories. We are called a network orchestrator. That's been captured in a Harvard Business Review article and a couple of Harvard Business cases. And as a network orchestrator, we take the order. We'll take this parka, for example, and we will orchestrate the factories needed to produce that parka. We don't own any of them. So we have a roughly called 30-70 rule. We try to give a factory, take 30% of their production, but no more than 70% of their production. We do that on purpose, so particularly that we want the factory to bring other brands, items, customers in there so that we can learn from them and they can learn from us. It's all part of this learning process that we're committed to. But basically, we don't own the factories, and that gives us a huge amount of flexibility and agility. So, I know we were talking earlier about what happens when a natural disaster strikes, like the floods in Thailand, for example. Well, we can move production from Thailand to Bangladesh, or from Bangladesh into India. And because we have this large factory network of 15,000 factories, quite a few of them are capable of doing different things. We can, in fact, move that around to deal with pricing differentials, to deal with currency issues, to deal with natural disasters, but also to be able to pick the best set of factories for that particular customer at that point in time for that order. And that's very unique in the supply chain world.
Let's talk about how the company makes decisions. And one of the celebrated aspects of the company's decision-making structure is the 3-year plan. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, let's go to the 3-year plan here for the moment. And again, this is well written up, by the way, so I'm going to have to give a plug for Victor's book called Competing in the Flat World. But what we're not even worried about saying these things in the political world we operate in. But Victor and William tell a wonderful story about how this developed. They looked across the border, and across the border they have a 5-year plan. And Victor and William looked at that and said, that plan's got some interesting characteristics. Let me take the market value and market issues away for a moment. The interesting characteristics is they set a broad statement, a broad purpose, and then they leave the individual regions to figure out the best way to do it. And then they hold them accountable for results. So we looked across at that and said, 5 years is too long. And then William said, but you know, most companies have rolling 3-year plans. And so you have a plan for this year. 6-7 months later, or into the year, you decide to get ready for the plan for next year. And you haven't even finished getting accountability for this year before we're already rolling the plans for next year. And so companies have the plans that continuously have this cycle to them. It's got some positive points. It's, you know, drilled right down to what's happening in your environment today, and you make immediate adjustments, or you try to anyway. But what you don't give is the people in the business the stability to be able to say, I can work on getting that objective, and I can find multiple paths to getting that objectives, and I can experiment along the way. The beauty of it is it gives us this chance to experiment during the plan and say, what am I learning? And it gives me time to change. And it gives the people that work in the business the stability to say, okay, for 3 years, this is the plan. Now, we do a couple of very interesting things. The world changes a lot in these 3 years, and we recognize that. We work hard at keeping our revenue numbers and our bottom line numbers in sight, but we recognize we have to change things internally often as we find things as we go. This gives the people in the business the confidence to say, I can take a small risk here. You know, I can experiment with this one, and then I can learn from it, and I can be able to implement it in the second year of the third-year plan or even the third year of the third-year plan. And then I can take all that learning to have us ready for the next three-year plan. So for us, it's a way of accelerating learning, giving the business stability, and keeping your eye focused on what the objectives are.
So what is the current three-year plan that is operational? That was the 2013 one? Or?
2013 to 2016, the one we're in right now.
Okay. So what are the key elements of that plan?
Okay. So let me take a step backwards. Part of our growth over the last 15 years or so, since roughly 2004, last 9 to 10 years, has been growth by acquisition. And that's been very, very carefully planned to be able to move us into some different markets and closer to the customers, primarily in the United States and in Europe. So we wanted to have good footholds in both of those geographic areas, and so we acquired the companies that would give us those footholds and put those together into our trading and now global brands businesses. And we came to this three-year plan and said, okay, it's time to consolidate that and to move away from the acquisitive growth much more into organic growth. We also did something else that was interesting. We took this licensed brand business, which had been placed in different parts throughout the trading business, and consolidated all of that and spun that off into our global brands group based in New York. That's closest to where the customers are. That group is much more focused on design and product development, and they in fact are enhancing the value of licenses, plus we own a couple of brands in that group. So the switch was to go from having both the licensed brands and the sourcing in one trading group to dividing that up so that we could focus in the trading group, which we call our 494 group. We could focus on sourcing and providing value to customers in both the agency and the trading as principal businesses. So the second thing we did is we really enhanced the power of our logistics group to have a laser focus on in-country logistics in China and Southeast Asia. So organic growth for the trading group, consolidation, an emphasis on logistics to be able to really take advantage of the opportunities that we had in the China and Southeast Asia market, and also to give us the opportunity to do some additional experimentation on the agency and trading as principal models simply because of the size we happen to have in some of those markets. So this three-year plan is really focused on the consolidation and learning. And as we're going to come back and talk a little bit later about the billion to billion and the context change in the world from global production to a world of both global production and global consumption.
So can you give us a glimpse into the next three-year plan, some of the drivers in what the future is going to look like?
Okay. Let me go to a slide that we have here that begins to tell the story for us from a geographic point of view and a demographic point of view. From 1979 to roughly 2009, if we just take a look at the globalization of production, China primarily and then in Southeast Asia, we brought there was 1 billion people that came into the workforce. And as we all know, a lot of the products that you and I enjoy and that the people watching enjoy are made in that part of the world. And we took a look at the demographics in that part of the world, and we saw a couple of really interesting things. Again, context for us is very important, and that ties to why we have a three-year planning process. The context showed us that there's going to be approximately 2.84 billion new consumers coming up in that part of the world. So the people that have been producing stuff are going to start consuming stuff. It's not that they haven't been consuming, they have been, and we've all talked about the bottom of the pyramid and the opportunities that offers. But now we're watching that number start to ramp up. They're not only, their incomes are beginning to rise. Countries that have been at the lower end of the economic ladder are beginning to climb up that economic ladder, and they're now becoming consumers. And they're not only becoming consumers, but as you know, going through those countries, and I was just in Myanmar here a couple of weeks ago, here's a country that's just been opened up in the last 2 years, and what do we find everywhere? I don't have it in my pocket, but everybody has a mobile phone. So we've seen the rise of technology, the accelerated use of exponential increase in computing power, the accelerated use of technology, and then the rise of consumerism. So it's really this incredible growth of consumerism in Asia And we looked at one other thing. We just looked at it in pieces. And in looking at it as we broke this down, we said, China opens up, but we also have advancements in the supply chain. Tremendous amounts of technology enable us to be able to track everything. You take a look at the size of the container ships now, which we didn't have in 1979. All of the ways that we are connected and understanding where all the products sit. So now I ship a product, and the product itself is interesting, but it's shrink wrapped with technology, and I really want to know all the information that goes with that product. And so the next thing that we basically saw as we moved from the advancement in technology, we also looked at basically the accelerating growth in the emerging markets, and that's the billion to billion. But also with technology, we have the revolution in the consumer interface. I mean, there's so many different ways we can buy things now, and we can look at things, we can search. That's the area that you've been helping us with quite a bit on really understanding customer intimacy and the new value proposition. But we also have the rise of sustainability considerations. So in the globalization of consumption, we really are taking a look at the drivers of the billion to billion. But I want to show one other interesting thing. The shift toward emerging markets is also accelerated by a couple of things you heard the Chinese premier talk about in the last year, and that's two Silk Roads, or what they call one road, one belt. And that is a northern overland route, which we've always had, and now we're looking at a southern maritime belt, and that's going to connect 60 countries and approximately 4 billion people. So context for us said that is a huge opportunity. Now, we don't want to lose sight of the West. I mean, even though this is all coming up, the West is still the tremendous market in terms of size, and it's not going away. So we looked at that market and we said, where are we really strong? Where are the opportunities for us to differentiate? And it turns out that when we began looking product by product that we did, which takes us back actually to our sort of 1979 to 2009, we began to look at product by product and saw in some areas we had a tremendous amount of expertise and also reach with a particular product area. So we began to say, let's build some platforms that are vertical, that we can take a complete product area, pull it out of the different parts of our business and focus on that globally, where we can have technology that can enhance it, where we have deep product expertise, we have deep customer expertise, and because we have a deep knowledge of the markets, we can work much more collaboratively with our customers around finding new ways to create value in the markets, which takes us back to that point on the Explorium, as we can kind of invent this stuff together. So as we look to the next 3-year plan, we're taking a look at the billion to billion. We're taking a look at what the opportunities provides us into that market. Explorium is our sort of space to look at it. And then in addition to that, we're taking a look at what we'll call the product platforms, where we have the opportunity to take our size, our scale, our scope, and be able to create some additional value in the markets for us and our customers.
Great. It's a fascinating company, and I have 17 more questions. But what I'd like to do is turn to questions from our audience. A number of people have asked whether you would open an Explorium for markets outside of Asia.
Great question. We haven't discussed that openly yet. There are, in the United States, quite a few retail organizations that have their own laboratories, that have their own innovation centers, that are doing this in their markets. So we have to remember that those are their markets, because, as you know, we're not in the B2C business in either Europe or the United States. So one exception in the United States with one brand, but basically we're not in the B2C business. The retailers are, they're our customers. They have their labs and they have their innovation centers. So we would like to say, what are we learning in the Explorium that we can help, that will transfer kind of a sort of innovation blowback to you? What are some of the things that you can think about in your home, in your own home markets? And we invite them to come visit with us in the Explorium and say, what can you bring that we can think about tailoring to the Asian market?
I see. We have a question from Mike Ditch, who is asking, when leading these transformations, what is one trait that a leader must have for success?
You know, I think, Chaim, we're sitting here in the Stanford Business School, and I think as I look around the academic and the communication world, the books are stacked pretty high about leadership. So there's a couple things that we think are really pretty important, and I'm going to generalize in a moment, then come down to some specifics. A key thing for us, given the type of company that we are in and the world that's moving, using again the exponential increase in computing power and the fact that we have a globalization of production, a globalization of consumption, probably for us one of the most important things is to have a global mindset. Is to be able to have a kind of a deep understanding of your own environment and to have an understanding of what's going on in the rest of the world to provide context for your decisions. The second thing we look at very closely for us is agility. And it's agility not only in your individual thinking, but also agility in the organization's structure and systems to be able to take into account things that are moving. And so we take a look basically at a global mindset, or context and agility are two things that for us are very, very important. I think a third point for us is also having a very deep understanding of how to talk to your employee culture. Because I've seen, and you've seen, lots of books written about it, and everybody talks about rolling out a culture or changing the culture, but we kind of look at it and say the culture's there, and it's got certain things that that it values itself. And how do we talk to that culture in a way that they're willing and committed to the directions we want to go and help us get there? And so for us, it's providing them the context and predictability and a good sense of self, and that really comes down to the agility and then finally what we call empathy in our leaders.
So another question we have from our audience is, how do you process and analyze failures? What do you do when there's a failure?
I think there's probably a lot of people that want to know the answer to that question this morning. I am. We do it in a couple of ways. One is, and we borrowed this from the concept of design thinking, that we set out with a hypothesis. And those hypotheses we're learning, as most people are, to get them what I'm going to call tighter and tighter and tighter, so we're asking the right questions. But also have them flexible enough so we can take into the fact that learning may change that hypothesis. So we start with a hypothesis. We go out and test it as quickly as we can. We like to use rapid prototyping as a method of doing that. And we're building that skill in the organization so that it becomes more of a habit rather than anything else. And then we basically measure what came out of that experiment. So setting up the hypothesis, we have a KPI or two in the middle of it. We finish with that and we say two things. What happened with the KPI, but what else did we learn? And then we'll make a decision about, are we going to pivot and say that didn't work, that's a failure. So we're not going to go forward with that. So let's say the one you saw at the Explorium with the kids on the electronic pad and the screen. Suppose it turns out that the kids didn't want to play. So we would say, well, so now what did we learn? That the kids didn't want to play, and we might pivot and say, well, they didn't want to play that particular game, so do we want to try another one? Is this whole issue of game design gets brought into the picture at that point, and we say maybe we didn't design that properly, so let's go back and try it again. Or maybe we didn't have the right customer segment in there. So we'll go back and play with different elements of that hypothesis, and then if it doesn't work, we just said it didn't work. So let's just take the learning from that and we'll go on to the next one. And with a company like ours with the 3-year plan, again, within small parts of that ongoing, we're testing it. In fact, customers are doing it with us all the time. They're asking us, anything simple, can you change this? Can we move to a different set of machines to do this particular kind of sewing? So we can come down to a very tactical level, but they're also usually asking us, can you change the design? Can we change a process so we can get through product development faster? So those for us are all experiments. They're ongoing in the business as just a part of our, let's call it our habit of the way that we stay relevant.
That's great. As you were talking about it, there was a question that flashed on the screen, which was, what do you do if in the first year you discover that your hypothesis on the 3-year plan is not working? And you answered that question as the question was flashing on the screen. So that's great. And we have one last question from Matthew, who is wondering, how do you maintain supply chain visibility?
I'm just going to use it in a simple word. It's called technology. We have a saying inside Lee and Fung called smart supply chains. And of course, the core is RFID technology in one form or another. So we track the order. In fact, we go back to, I want to call almost back to the future with this one. We have the technology, but you, Chaim, you and I may remember a great Harvard Business Review article written, I forget how many years ago, called Staple Yourself to an Order.
More than 30.
Right, so coming out of manufacturing, we all kind of learned that. But in a sense, we staple ourselves with technology to the order. We staple it from on the, let me call it, all the inbound logistics of the order, which for us this might be a tech pack going to the team that's going to put it into the factories, to what's gone from the mill to the cut and sew, from the zippers coming in to the buttons coming in. We track all of those. And then, of course, we track it all the way back to the customer. So we staple ourselves to the order with technology. Mm-hmm. And we have a very unique look at IT because we've made a lot of acquisitions. We've had to do a lot of what we call plug and play. So we can actually plug the new acquisition into our system in order to let that acquisition still have the customer-facing intimacy that it wanted without being tied up in our bureaucracy. And so now a significant amount of work is being done to eliminate duplication between our system and a customer system so that we in fact have the customer saying, you guys have all the data, you can manage all of this with us together. So for us, it's basically staple yourself to an order with the accelerated increase in computing
with
power.
the new and improved stapler.
That's right.
Hey, thank you very much for all of these insights. That was great, and I hope it was useful for everybody.
Yeah, so I'd like to join Chaim in thanking Leonard Lane for joining us and thank our audience for spending this hour with us. I hope it was useful and informative, and we will be sending out a recording of this webinar within a week so that you can revisit this material if you wish. Thank you and have a good day.